What's your I met a celebrity but didn't let on that I knew who they were story? My dad and I bumped into Michael Jordan at a Walgreens near Chicago. This was back in 2006 or so. We were picking out birthday cards for my mom, and MJ and his son came in the same aisle browsing some cards. My dad kept his cool and continued to look through different cards, giving him his personal space. I, on the other hand, was 9 years old and in awe, sort of staring at him. After MJ picked out his card, he winked at me and gave me a walk-by fist bump. Didn't really set in until I was older how cool that was. I worked at a Barnes & Noble in NY as a clerk, but once or twice I'd be called over to the in-store Starbucks cafe to help out whenever they were understaffed. One time, Alan Rickman came up and ordered something. I can't recall what. I wrote Hans Gruber on his cup though. He smiled at me when he noticed it. My husband was vacationing in Arizona, killing time in a bar over a burger and a beer. A guy sits next to him and my husband has a nice chat with him. The guy leaves and my husband goes to close his tab and the bartender tells him it's been covered by the guy he was talking to. The bartender asks if he knows who he was talking to. My husband has no idea. Chuck Norris. It was his bar. I was in a bookstore in RI and was in the horror section. Picked up a book by Stephen King and flipped it over and saw his picture on the back, or inside the cover. I don't really remember. I look up, and in the next aisle over, right across the bookshelf from me, is a guy that looks exactly like Stephen King. So I hold up the book and say, "Is this you?" "Yep, good books. Thanks." And that was that. Worked at a hotel and Russell Crowe came in the lobby. He went to the house phones and called front desk, where I was working. I could see him pretty easily. I answered the phone and he asked to be connected to a room, so I put him through. This wasn't long after he threw a phone at a hotel clerk, so I didn't want to take a chance at pissing him off. About 40 years ago my father was sitting next to Telly Savalas at some Vegas blackjack table. For about an hour they talked and bet some large amounts of money, and my father never let on that he knew the guy was famous. Telly finally says, "It's pretty cool that you haven't asked for my autograph." My father responds, "Well, you didn't ask for mine." Telly laughs and writes on a cocktail napkin, "Hey Jeff, can I have your autograph?" He carried that damn napkin with him for years. My dad did something similar with Huey Lewis in the 80s. They were riding alone in an elevator and my dad said something like, "Hi, I'm Mike. I'm sure you've been dying to meet me." By all accounts, Huey was reasonably amused and they parted ways when the elevator stopped. My ex's brother and his then GF were once in an elevator when this incredibly tall guy got in with them. The GF stared at him for a few seconds as the elevator started moving again and then blurted out, I'm paraphrasing, "Bit close enough, holy shit you're tall. You could be a basketball player or something." The guy chuckled and said, "Yeah, I get that a lot," as he got off at his floor. That guy was Michael Jordan. Was at a convenience store in LA when me and a very nicely dressed black gentleman walked up to the cashier at the same time to pay. It was nighttime and he had his dark shades on and was talking on his phone. I gave him the after you gesture and he nodded and said, "Thanks buddy," paid and left. It wasn't until he was out of the store that I realized he was Jamie Foxx. Was walking out of a gas station over on Crescent Heights and Sunset and heard a hey coming from a cracked window on tinted out Range Rover that was parked at one of the pumps. I walk over to the car to see Jeff Goldblum, who had somehow seen my gold ring I was wearing on my right hand from 20 feet away. He proceeds to tell me how he loves my ring and has been looking for one just like it and asks me where I got it. I tell him it was my grandfather's and he asks to see it up close. I hold my hand up to Jeff Goldblum. He takes my hand, gushes about the ring for a minute and thanks me. I said sure and walked back to my apartment. I like to think we're friends now. Conan O'Brien. My college friend's dad owned an Irish restaurant in Manhattan and she waitressed there back in the 1990s. She said he was super rude to the staff and was a bad tipper. One day a bunch of us were walking in the city and we saw him at a sidewalk cafe. We stopped and stared and he noticed we were talking about him. My other friend went up to his table and asked him to take a picture of us and handed him her camera. His friends at the table had a huge laugh at his expense as we posed for a picture without him in it. We never let on we knew who he was. Now we all hold dear and off sent a photo of us with a funny backstory. Before I realized who he was, Sean Alexander asked me if I liked football. I told him I liked the Steelers. He said, "Yeah, I lost to them in the Super Bowl." I felt pretty stupid, but he thought it was funny. Super nice guy. Samuel L. Jackson was on my flight. I was second to last aboard the flight and there was all this commotion with the flight attendants and gate crew. Once I approached the door of the plane I realized they were all looking at Samuel L. Jackson. He was standing by the cockpit making himself available to passengers' fans. I played it cool. Didn't say a word. Turns out, I'm shy around celebrities. I'm just glad I didn't make a snakes on the plane joke. Not sure if this counts as a celebrity, but last fall I was flying from LA to Dallas and the person sitting next to me was a Real Housewife from Bravo. I didn't recognize her since I don't watch her show, but she did mention it to me multiple times during the flight. She wanted to apologize in advance in case there were fans hounding her at the baggage claim. Spoiler alert, there weren't. Hours later when I was checking into my hotel, she was there in the lobby and made sure to tell me again that she was on TV. This will get buried, but I went to college in Silicon Valley. One day I was at the Apple store buying a new laptop after my old one crapped out. The person helping me went to go get the laptop I wanted, and this chubby middle-aged dude with an unkempt beard and a backpack that looked like it weighed 100 pounds came over to me. He told me he overheard what the sales guys and I were talking about and told me to be sure I asked about the student discount. I thanked him and we parted ways. Later that year, I was watching some show about something or another and that same guy from the Apple store appeared on screen. Turns out the bearded backpack wearer was Steve Wozniak. He lived in the city I went to school in and apparently liked to go to the Apple store in the mall like a regular ass person. Couple of years ago I was playing blackjack at a relatively low stakes table, maybe $10 minimum. I was chatting up a lady in her 30s next to me, just chatting, nothing more. A huband was sitting next to her. He was a frumpy guy in his 60s. After about 30 minutes he took off and left the table. I was still chatting up the lady and she told me that other guy was her husband. I asked why they were in town and she said for work. She mentioned that her husband was the drummer for Aerosmith, Joey Kramer, playing at the same casino the next night. I stupidly asked how when he started playing with them. Her reply, since the beginning. Edit, chatting up in US English. I guess in the UK it means something different. There really was no flirting involved. Not sure if this counts, but when I was 15 I was really into playing StarCraft. Being a 3-month-old game at the time, on Battle.net, I did mostly 3v3 games. After finishing this one particularly epic match close game, we won. We all got into a chat room to talk about how fun that was if I recall correctly. One of them says something to the effect of not sure if you all care but you just beat Ben Affleck. Of course we all ask him to prove it, so he told us to wait a minute and visit his official website's message board. benaffleck.com or something like that. He had just made a post in Red being Ben Affleck himself, about just losing a game of StarCraft. We briefly chatted with him and that was it. He was a massive gamer. If you played StarCraft during the early 2000s you probably lost to Ben Affleck at some point. I met Justin Timberlake and had no idea it was him until someone told me afterwards. Went to a basketball game with my dad and we stopped by the bar area in the arena first. The game had just started so it was pretty empty except for the bar itself. My dad goes to the restroom and I walk up to the bar to order a beer. There's only one seat at the bar next to a guy in a baseball cap and sunglasses. I politely ask if the seat is taken and he just says nope. It's all you, man. We shoot it for a couple minutes. He's sitting on my right and eventually he says he and his wife are going to go to their seats. He extends his hand and asks my name. I tell him and ask his name. He says, Justin. Nice to meet you, dude. Have a good night. He and his wife leave and the bartender comes up to me and says, you know that was Justin Timberlake, right? I immediately did a double take and couldn't believe I didn't recognize him even with the hat and sunglasses. I told my girlfriend at the time who was a huge Justin Timberlake fan and she couldn't believe I met him without knowing it was him. She wouldn't let it go for like a month. Edit, to answer some questions. This was a Memphis Grizzlies game and no, the bartender wasn't messing with me because during one of the timeouts, they showed him on camera and had him come onto the court to wave at fans and hype the crowd up, etc. I don't think he expected them to do that and didn't like it because he left at halftime. Probably just wanted to go to a game without being hounded by fans or something. Edit 2. I never got a good look at Jessica Biel. She was wearing sunglasses as well but she didn't say anything at all during our conversation and since I didn't even realize I was talking to Justin Timberlake, I wasn't about to gawk at this random beautiful woman while talking to her husband. I met Simon Pegg when I was working as a cashier at Borders. It was like a Tuesday in the afternoon and the place was empty. He came up to me with some stationery and I started ringing him up. The entire time I was thinking he looked so much like him, but I didn't think it was him since I wasn't in the UK and as far as I knew he wasn't filming a movie in Chicago. So it was a pretty quiet transaction. After it was done and I was handing him his bag with his stuff, I jokingly said, "Has anyone told you that you look like the guy from Shaun of the Dead?" He replied, "I am the guy from Shaun of the Dead." Years ago, like 20 years ago, I went to see Adam Sandler stand up at a small comedy club. Clearly I knew who he was because I got tickets to his show. My date and I were running a smidge late and ran into a guy in the lobby, a guy I used to work with. So I was like, "Hey, Danny, how are you doing? What have you been up to?" He was like, "I'm good. How are you?" I responded that I was good, but running late for the show. Had to run and he said, "Okay, have a good night," and walked off. As my date and I walked into the club, he said, "You know who that was?" It wasn't Danny. It was Adam Sandler. But, gotta say, he played the part of Danny well. One of his better roles. Stood in front of Miranda Cosgrove in line for Space Mountain at Disneyland. Weirdest part of it was we were in the same car on the ride and nobody screamed or did anything during the ride. It was completely silent. Me and my sister just looked at each other like, WTF is going on? 3 years back I was working at a Whataburger in Austin and internet personality Mia Khalifa walks in with 5 other people. She and her friends ordered the largest meal they can and ate it in the lobby. The whole time the back kitchen is getting overly excited. Looking back, it was pretty weird to see her in person and is the only celebrity I have seen in person. In the mid-90s I was a cab driver. Our service was like a cross between a limo and a taxi, and we serviced some fancy resorts. As I dropped off my passenger at a resort, another guy asks if I'm a taxi, and I say yes. So he tells his friend their cab is here. His friend got in the car and said, "This ain't no cab. Smells too good to be a cab," in that unmistakable Chris Rock voice. He and his friend just bullshitted with each other for the 15-minute drive to a local nightclub. There was a white kid trying to talk to a yellow cab driver ahead of us in the parking lot and Chris Rock started imitating the kid. Like, "I need a ride. Yeah, I'm drunk, but I need a ride." And I was trying really hard not to laugh out loud. He wasn't nearly as famous yet at the time, but I had seen his stand-up routines on Comedy Central and knew exactly who he was, but didn't go fanboy on him.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to be entered into our iMac giveaway.